Hello, and thank you for joining me for this episode of Home Economics. I'm Carol Bousquet, your host. I'm a realtor with Keller Williams Realty, Merrimack Valley. I was a television broadcaster while serving in the U.S. Air Force. I'm both a military veteran and a veteran real estate agent, which is why I thought, let me combine those skills to bring useful information about the real estate marketplace to you. If there's one thing I've learned, everyone loves talking about real estate, and that's just what we'll be doing, discussing real estate, home ownership, and community here. Today, we'll talk with attorney Craig Reynolds about recent changes to the closing process meant to protect consumers. And speaking of protection, on our segment called Homework, Andy Consoli, principal of ABC Home Inspection, and I will discuss radon in our homes. We'll open for the first time right here on air, radon test results done in my own home. I'm looking forward to that. Stay tuned. Joining me today is my very first guest, attorney Craig Reynolds of the Reynolds Law Offices. Reynolds Law Offices have 3 offices, one in Westford, Fitchburg, and also in Lancaster. And today we're here to talk about consumer protection. Craig has 30 years experience in the real estate industry, and I'm sure has seen numbers of changes over time. But a big one came down this fall. So this little item in the real estate world called TRID, the Truth in Lending Disclosure, has changed closing procedures. Craig, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Tell us a little bit about how TRID has been hitting.
Well, when TRID went into effect October of last year, or in preparation of TRID going into effect October last year, there was a lot of consternation in the industry about how it was going to affect transactions. A lot of concern that it might be delaying transactions, adding a lot of new regulatory, a lot of regulations to the lenders' processes and such. And fortunately, it hasn't turned out to be as bad as we feared it might be. In fact, it's going to be good for the consumer in the end.
And what exactly is happening? What's the big change look like?
What TRID has done is try to address the overall process, primarily from the lending standpoint and from the closing standpoint, just to make sure the consumers have better information earlier in the process, have a much easier time of understanding it, more time to ask questions of their lenders and other professionals in the transaction.
So this change is a result of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau putting in place protections for the consumer relative to the banking industry. So what we're seeing as realtors and as attorneys in the real estate business is that now, in order to get to closing, you want to allow a solid 8 weeks. It used to be you could rush between 4 and 6. We're discouraging that and allowing for more time, because in the closing moments, when things are most exciting, the last week or two, when things get hot and heavy and people are very excited and very emotionally involved, what happens now is that you get your closing package 3 days before closing so you can review it. Whereas before, they were plopped, a big pile of papers to sign were plopped in front of you at the hour of closing.
So lenders have always, in fact everyone in the industry has always worked against deadline. So it wasn't uncommon under the old system that buyers wouldn't be seeing their final numbers, their final closing documents until literally the morning of the closing, at best the day before closing. Now, as you indicated, under the new TRID regulations, they're required to see the final numbers at least 3 days, and in many times they're seeing them up to a week before the closing. So again, just gives them a much better opportunity to understand exactly what they're getting into, ask a lot of questions of their professionals.
And what's key here, as we're discovering, is it's difficult to make changes at the closing table, because if there are significant changes, you need another 3 days to review the new documents.
That's true, and that was a fear of ours that was going to be happening time and time again. Fortunately, we haven't really seen that become much of a real factor. Some of the numbers that do change last minute, such as oil adjustments, water adjustments, things of those sort, have turned out not to be an issue. The only scenario where there's going to be a new 3-day waiting period is if any of the loan terms change. And the lenders are really getting their numbers right the first time out so that they're not having to see any of those last minute changes in their numbers, which is what drives the redisclosures.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any particular advice you'd want to give a buyer or a seller in preparation for closing?
I mean, the single most important thing is to be working with a lender that you have confidence in. Most buyers haven't had a lot of experience working with a lot of different lenders, but the realtor and the attorney that they are working with have had experience with a lot of lenders, so they know who really has their act together, who's going to meet the deadlines. Because in any transaction, any contract between a buyer and a seller, there's a lot of critical dates in that contract. You need to make sure that you're going to make those dates. Having a lender that can't process things in a timely fashion is going to lead to huge problems. So just even more so today than it has been in the past, working with lenders that you know their track record, relying on your realtor, your attorney to recommend you to those lenders.
Yeah, making sure you have the A-team in place.
Exactly so.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Craig, for joining us today for our first episode of Home Economics.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Joining me today as my second guest on the very first episode of Home Economics is Andy Consoli, Home Inspector Extraordinaire, Principal of ABC Home Inspections. I ran into Andy this year, this fall, in a class that he teaches. Andy teaches a load of realtor continuing education. And what clicked for me in that class, Andy, was the point that you made about radon being required now in all new home construction. So let's talk about radon. What is it, and how do we protect ourselves from it? And by the way, thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Radon is it's the breakdown of uranium. Uranium breaks down. It takes billions of years for uranium to break down into radium, and then billions of years for radium to break down into radon. But only 3.8 days for radon to break down. And when radon has its final breakdown, it tears the DNA of the lung cell in half. And when the DNA repairs itself, it can mutate. So every 25 minutes in the United States, someone dies from radon. There are over 21,000 deaths per year from radon. Radon's the #1 cause of lung cancer in America if you're a non-smoker. So it is a big deal, and we do radon tests every single day at our company.
Mm-hmm. I know in our community, heck, we have a neighborhood named Graniteville.
Sure.
And radon is endemic. As I said, it is now regulation in the state of Massachusetts that all new construction have radon mitigation systems be installed in that new construction. So let's talk about testing. How does that get done?
Well, there are many ways to test, but the two most popular ways would be something called liquid scintillation. That's what we did in your home. And then there's the radon monitor. It's an ion chamber. So the scintillation, 2 little bottles we leave behind. We open these bottles up at the home, and we leave them there for 2 days. Mm-hmm. We have activated charcoal in the bottle. That means charcoal that's been heated. When you heat charcoal, it becomes activated, which attracts the radon particle. So the radon particle jumps into the bottle. 2 days later, we put the caps on. These bottles go to the laboratory. The laboratory analyzes how many radon particles are trapped in the bottle. Well, if we have 4 picocuries of radon, 4 picocuries of radon in the radon test, for instance, in your home, if we find a 4, that's not good news for you. If we find less than 4, we're okay. 4 is equal to approximately 500 chest x-rays every year. So we want to stay below 4. Now the monitor is a different method. We use an electric device. Radon goes into the device. The radon contacts a metal plate, and that metal plate will record how many radon particles are landing within the device. And we're able to then decipher whether the radon is 4 or less through that device. So these are the two most common ways of doing it. I'm nervous about your radon test.
You're nervous. What would determine one test over the other? What determines a preference?
Well, the monitor is a quicker test. We can get that done in 2 days. The vials would take anywhere from 5 to 7 days. The monitor, we have an hourly reading of radon. The vials, we only have one number. So we can learn a lot more by the monitor than we can by the vials. But the bottom line is your test will be accurate, but we won't know how we got to the number. We won't see an hourly reading.
All right. Well, let's not delay. This particular episode of Home Economics is all about consumer protection, and that included doing a radon test in my home for the first time in 15 years.
Drum roll.
Drum roll. Let's see what we have. Annie, will you do me the honors, please?
Boy, let's see what we have here. We have, oh, this is very good, 0.5 picocuries in the living room, and yeah, that's where you put it. So you're good. You're going to live a long time. Excellent, good job. That made me nervous this week.
Yeah.
Certain parts of the state, and up in New Hampshire when we have a lot of granite, we find readings that are over 20, 30, 40, even up to 1,000. So this is good. Good news.
So how often would a homeowner, or should a homeowner test? I mean, if I haven't done this in 15 years, what kinds of markers are you looking for relative to perhaps putting it on a regular schedule like we do changing our batteries and our fire alarms?
Seasonally, for sure. Radon changes every minute of every day. So if it was stormy, I don't know when you tested this, but if it was a stormy day or 2 days, windy, stormy, the radon results would be higher. A calm day, they'd be lower. In the winter, they'll be a little bit higher. See, radon comes up out of the ground. And if there's snow on the ground, it doesn't come up through the ice and snow. It comes under your home and into your house. So we have a higher reading in your home on a day when the ground is frozen. On a windy day, the wind creates an atmospheric pressure differential and it creates a vacuum. That vacuum creates, it's an actual internal home vacuum that pulls radon out of the floor into the home. So this reading right here, would you say it was a couple of decent days?
It was a couple decent
Average,
days.
normal, everyday days.
Average, normal days, no traffic.
This is fine. So on a really weird, stormy day, it will be a little higher, but you're so low, it's not going to be a problem.
That's great. So we do advise that people test on the floors that they're living in. A lot of folks like to test in the basement, of course.
Well, I'll tell you what the EPA says. EPA says the lowest living level of a home or the lowest level that could be lived in without substantial renovation. So when people ask me where should we put the radon test, EPA says the lowest living level. If the buyer wants to put it in the level that is not like, for instance, a laundry room or a cellar in a home, that's up to them. They could do that, but it's against protocol. EPA is concerned. They want to know when you test radon, where will your lungs spend most of their time, and it isn't down in the laundry room. So EPA is concerned relative to your. Some people do the bedroom. They figure I'm in there 8 hours a night, and that could be on the second floor. So everybody picks a place. Then I would recommend the lowest living level. That's what the EPA says.
So what about granite countertops that people are putting in their homes? I mean, it's granite. It's the top of the list, decoratively speaking, in our kitchens, and that's around the food that we eat.
Sure. The EPA says we're not supposed to place these little bottles on a granite countertop or a pool table, because you do have a higher reading, a higher level of radon on the granite. Radon comes from granite, shale, pitchblende, different stone. And it has always been there from the beginning of time. It's just that lately, in the past 20 years, granite's become a common countertop. And I find higher levels of radon sometimes in the kitchen than I do in the lowest level of the home because of the amount of granite. I love granite. I have a lot of granite. My level in my kitchen is a little bit higher than it is in my other rooms. But as long as I'm below 4, I feel I'm okay.
I asked this question when we were in class together this fall, and you mentioned that there are people that will actually test their slab of granite
True.
in the shop before they buy it and bring it home. And if the radon level is too high, they will go on and select yet another piece of granite before installing it in their home.
True.
Which is at least one idea for how to approach
You can build a
this.
little plastic tent on top of the granite at the factory, and we put the bottles inside the tent. Leave them there for a couple days, and you might be purchasing a slab that's loaded with radon. You're better off knowing that ahead of time.
Sure. Let me ask about commercial spaces. What kinds of controls and how often are commercial space, how cognizant are business owners of this particular?
Not so much. We do a lot of this we've done a lot of banks, a lot of schools, but it doesn't come up as often as it should. The worker is in that space all day, and they should be checking the radon levels along with other things, mold, radon, there are other things to look for. But they should. If you're in a sub-level part of a building, you definitely should be looking into radon. The protocol is more geared toward residential living, but it's a good idea if you have an employee that you want to take care of.
Is there anything you want to add about radon before we move on to our next topic?
And the next topic would be?
I just wanted you to tell us about the many services you provide as ABC Home Inspection briefly.
Well, I want to make sure that if people are interested in buying a home, they should absolutely do radon, no matter what. Even if it's a condo and they're on the 20th floor, radon can be coming out of the materials. It also can come up through the walls. It can get into the highest, even at the beaches where houses are built on stilts. They don't even have a lower level. Radon comes up through the chases from the plumbing supplies into the living space. So every home should be tested for radon, period.
Okay. Super, thank you. And now tell us a little bit about ABC Home Inspection and the panoply of services you provide.
I started ABC Home Inspection 32 years ago, and we have 12 inspectors on the road. We do home inspections in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. We have probably an 80-page computerized report with details and pictures. We're in the home for 2 to 3 hours. The report is emailed that day. We're looking for everything. We're looking for termite damage and powder post beetles and roof issues. I did 2 inspections today, and the second house had a lot of termites. The sills and sections of the floor joists were termite damaged. We found issues in the first home. The back wall in a crawl space was completely destroyed with water rot, dry rot. It had a serious problem due to the lack of flashing on the deck. Water had been pouring in. I know you've seen that before. It had been pouring in, and it caused the entire sill plates to rot away. They're going to have to jack that whole crawl space up. It's a problem. And that buyer now he's concerned because at least he knows that he has an issue ahead of him, and he may want to walk away. We'll see what happens.
So home inspections, just like radon, are critical. Some of us realtors, depending on the condition of the house and the condition of actually the seller, we might suggest that they do a home inspection before they go on the market, so they know they're actually, what they're getting into, and they have it in writing, and they have it for their own information, so there aren't any surprises by the time you get to, 2 months later to closing or final inspection and so on. So thank you very much, Andy, for joining us today, and I hope you'll come back. Andy's one of our favorite real estate educators, so thanks again.
Thank you very much.
You betcha.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me today on Home Economics. We'll feature people or services that provide practical services to homeowners, including people or agencies in our communities who impact our residential quality of life. You can expect that we'll be covering discussions on home buying and selling, staging, marketing, financing, and even community development. If you have questions about real estate or particular topics you'd like to see featured on Home Economics, please drop me a line. See you next time.